Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of FFB from the 50. The calendar has flipped over to the month of July and it is time to really start digging into the fantasy football season. We are going to come out with player rankings. I want more information before we do those, so those should be coming out towards the middle of the month, but we do want to go back to the basics. If you go back to season 1 of FFB from the 50, I did a whole series of fantasy football basics. This is good whether you're an experienced fantasy football player who just needs a refresher, or if you are new to the fantasy football game. In this episode, we're going to cover knowing your league. The first thing I want to cover is, do you know what kind of league you are in or what kind of league you are joining? There is a big difference between a redraft league, a dynasty league, a keeper league, a guillotine, a best ball, a super flex, a vampire league. There are many different kind of fantasy football leagues out there. You need to know what kind of league you're entering or what kind of league that you're in. That will affect how you draft. Make sure you come back for the video where I cover the different kind of fantasy football leagues. You'll see why it's so important to know going into it. The second thing you are going to want to know is how many teams are in the league. Now hear me out on this. I know some people are going to say, well, that doesn't really matter, but there is a huge difference between an 8-person, 10-person, 12-person, 16-person league. Depending upon your draft slot, you may have to reach for players earlier than you would normally have to draft them because it could be a long time before your pick comes back around. It is important to know how many players are in your league. That way you know what to expect going into the draft. Are you going to have a league full of studs? Or are you going to have a league that is washed out and the talent is more spread out amongst the teams? The next thing you're going to want to know is, what are the roster settings? How many players are you going to have on your roster? What is the positional breakdown? Is there a maximum of players that you're allowed to have at one position? Who can play in the flex? Is it a super flex where a quarterback can go in the flex? Is it a running back or a wide receiver? Or are you in a league that will allow a tight end in the flex spot? Does your league allow for an IR position? How many bench spots do you have? These are all important things to know going into the draft. Those bench spots and that IR slot are huge as far as determining the amount of depth that you want to get. If you're in a league that only starts one running back and your flex can be a running back, you may not need as many running backs as you would if you were in a league that starts 2 and a flex. Make sure you pay attention to those things. In a super flex league, a quarterback can go in your flex spot. That means going into the draft, you have to know that the quarterbacks are going to go early compared to other redraft leagues. What are your scoring settings? Is it PPR, half-point PPR, standard? Do you get 4 points for a passing touchdown, 6 points for a passing touchdown, 6 points for all touchdowns? How many yards do you have to get to gain a point? In most leagues, it takes 25 passing yards to gain one, but only 10 yards of rushing or receiving to gain a point. Do you get yardage bonuses? Do you get tackles for loss bonuses on defense? Do you get negative points? If your quarterback throws an interception, is it -2? If he throws a pick 6, is it -2 or is it -8? Some leagues really penalize that. -2 for the interception, -6 for the touchdown. If you have a fumble, is it -2 points? It is so important to know those scoring settings, especially when it comes to the PPR, half-point PPR standard. You will see running backs fly up the list, like Rachaad White, for example, who catches a lot of passes, even if he doesn't get that many rushing yards or rushing touchdowns. PPR versus standard or even half-point makes a huge difference in who you target in your drafts and how early you target them. What type of draft do you have? Do you have an online draft? If you do, how long do you have per pick? Is it the standard 2 minutes? Is it only 30 seconds? Are you in one of those drafts that goes on for days where there's really no time limit? It makes sense. Make sure you know how much time you have. Make sure you know if you're drafting online. Or are you in my personal favorite? Are you in a live, in-person draft where everybody's sitting around a draft room or even in somebody's backyard eating pizza, shooting the breeze with your fellow players and having a good time? Know the draft. How do waivers work in your league? Do you have waivers? Is it free agent only? If you have waivers, what are the waiver rules? Do you have a waiting period? Do waivers apply to every single player if they're dropped? Do they start on Thursday night? Do they start on Sunday and run until Tuesday? How long are those waivers? Do you have fab money? In other words, instead of having waivers, do you have a free agency budget where you only have, let's say, $100 or $200 and you have to wager auction style on the players that are available? Do you have a limit on how many moves that you can make? Some leagues limit the amount of moves that you can make throughout the season. How many teams make the playoff? Is it the standard top 4 seeds? Do you have divisions? Those are important things to know as well. Do you have a trade deadline? What are your trade rules? Who can veto the trade? Is it league vote or is it up to the commissioner? And most importantly, the one thing that I can say that you really need to try to do if possible is get to know your opponents. Know the players in the league that you're playing in. Know which players value certain positions. I play in leagues where tight ends are valued. If you can get a premium tight end, they can typically outscore the ones below them by more points than the spread, let's say, between the quarterback 1 and the quarterback 5, or even the quarterback 6 through 10. Know your adversaries. Know who's willing to trade, who typically vetoes trades. Not to mention that knowing your opponents will help you predict what they're going to do in the draft. If you know that a player is high on a guy that you want, and their pick is coming up, you might want to take that player. Chances are they may not be there when it comes back around to your turn to draft. Alright, I hope this helps. This is just a brief introduction, and I am going to do videos breaking down each one of these things. It's also important to come back for the how to master the trade. I actually negotiated professionally for 5 years before I switched over to the mortgage side. So if you want to come back for that, that might be an interesting video for all of you to watch. How to master the fantasy football trade. Alright, that's it for this one. Go down in the comment section. Let us know what else I missed in here. What else do you need to know going into the season about your league? Make sure you go down there, be respectful in the comment section. And hey, until next time, see ya.